Whispered True Crime. Please consider subscribing to the channel. I post 2 times a week, on Monday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I recommend using headphones if you would like to hear the gentle mic brushing. Now let's get right into tonight's case. Tonight we are traveling to Missouri. Shout out to all my friends in Missouri. This case is one that you may have been hearing a lot about lately, and it is the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And the reason that it has hit the media again after so many years is because Gypsy Rose has just been released from prison, and there is a new docuseries on Lifetime about her. Now, I have not seen the docuseries because I don't have Lifetime. But anyway, I have done quite a bit of research, so I am going to tell you about the entire case and then about the recent shocking revelations that were supposedly in the docuseries. Alright, so let's get to it. We'll start with a little background on Gypsy Rose's mother, whose name was Dee Dee Blanchard, or that's what she went by. She was born as Claudine Petre, P-I-T-R-E, in 1967, and she grew up with her family in Golden Meadow, Louisiana. She was one of 5 children. Now, her mother, Emma, repeatedly went to court for shoplifting. She was said to have stolen clothes from the laundromat regularly, and it was said that she had stolen $3,000 to $4,000 from her husband's father. Now, I guess Dee Dee learned this or inherited the trait from her mother because relatives of Dee Dee said that she had a habit of stealing from her family when things didn't go her way, like it was a type of revenge. You don't want to do what I want, I'll steal from you. And her family even suspected that she killed her own mother, Emma, by starving her, withholding food from her when she was sick. And that was in 1997. But that was never proven. It's just what the family believed. So, when Dee Dee was 24, she got pregnant by I wanted to say man, but he was only 17, so a guy named Rod Blanchard, and they got married because she was pregnant. But they broke up right before she had the baby because Rod Blanchard said that he had married her for the wrong reason and he didn't love her. So she gave birth to her baby Gypsy child support of $1,200. Even though Dee Dee would claim that he did not pay, he did pay the child support, and he wanted to be a part of her life. But over time, Dee Dee made it nearly impossible for that to happen. When Gypsy Rose was 3 months old, Dee Dee started telling everyone that she had sleep apnea, and she began taking her to doctors and to the hospital for overnight stays and testing, but no sign of sleep apnea was found. So Dee Dee decided that her daughter had a whole bunch of health issues stemming from some kind of non-specific chromosomal disorder. So she said that Gypsy Rose had leukemia, epilepsy, and muscular dystrophy. She shaved her daughter's head so she would look like she had been taking drugs for chemotherapy for her leukemia. She made her use a wheelchair. And when Gypsy Rose was 8, she had a feeding tube surgically inserted in Gypsy Rose so she could take her medicine and her nutrition through a feeding tube. She was given painkillers as well as many other medications over the years, but even Gypsy Rose herself does not know exactly what she was given. Gypsy Rose stopped going to school early on in elementary school, and supposedly she was homeschooled by Dee Dee, but I don't believe she was actually schooling her, because it was said that Gypsy taught herself how to read by using Harry Potter books. So anyway, Dee Dee claimed that she couldn't go to school because of her physical illnesses. It was too difficult to go to school. So that kept her pretty isolated from others. Now, while Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose were living with Dee Dee's father and stepmother, she was suspected of having poisoned her stepmother, leading to her stepmother having a chronic illness during that time. Also at that time, Dee Dee was arrested for several minor crimes, such as writing bad checks, and her family started confronting her about her treatment of Gypsy Rose. So she decided it was time to move on out. Or some said they threw her out. I'm not sure which one is accurate. But anyway, they moved to the New Orleans suburb of Slidell. And once they left, her stepmother's health condition magically disappeared. So, they started to go to many doctors for treatment of Gypsy Rose's supposed ailments. Gypsy Rose had a muscle biopsy done to see if she had muscular dystrophy, but no evidence of muscular dystrophy was found. Dee Dee claimed that Gypsy Rose had seizures on a regular basis, and she was successful in getting anti-seizure medication for Gypsy Rose. Several surgeries were performed on Gypsy Rose, such as removal of her salivary glands, because her mother said she had excessive drooling, tried giving her Botox injections to make the drooling stop. And when she returned and was still drooling at the doctor's office, they scheduled surgery to remove her salivary glands. Now, the lack of salivary glands, which obviously your mouth would be very dry, right? Which is not good for your teeth. So that plus the anti-seizure medication caused most of her teeth to decay, and then she had to get like dentures for most of her teeth. At this time, she also had tubes surgically implanted in her ears due to the complaint of so many ear infections. After Hurricane Katrina hit their area in August of 2005, their apartment was ruined and they moved into a shelter which was for people with special needs. And that was in Covington, Louisiana. And at that time, Dee Dee said all of Gypsy Rose's medical records were destroyed in the flood. So nobody could look back and see, what was true and what wasn't. And she even said that she lost her birth certificate in the flood. And she began telling everyone that Gypsy was younger than she was. And even Gypsy said she wasn't really sure how old she was at some point. A month after the flood, they moved to Missouri, and Dee Dee rented them a home in Aurora, Missouri. Gypsy Rose was honored at that time by the Olay Foundation, which advocates for the rights of feeding tube recipients. That was for their 2007 Child of the Year. In 2008, Habitat for Humanity heard their story and built them a house. It was a small home with a wheelchair ramp and a hot tub. And the entire community pitched in to help Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose after all that they had been through. They received free boarding at the Ronald McDonald House during medical appointments, free flights to go see doctors at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, free trips to Disney World, backstage passes to the Miranda Lambert concerts through the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Now, all the while, her father was still sending $1,200 a month, as well as sending her gifts and speaking to her on the phone when he could. He recalls that when he called her on her 18th birthday, Dee Dee said to him not to mention her real age because she believes she is 14. Dee Dee said that to Gypsy Rose's father. Dee Dee had told all the neighbors that Rod Blanchard was actually an abusive drug addict and alcoholic who had never come to terms with his daughter's health issues and never sent them any money. Which was obviously all a lie. Now, I mentioned earlier that Dee Dee always shaved her daughter's head, so when they went out, oftentimes Gypsy Rose would wear a wig. She would bring an oxygen tank and feeding tube with them. And Gypsy Rose was fed liquid nutrition such as Pediasure well into her 20s. Gypsy Rose was controlled by her mother through physical abuse. One thing she often did was she made sure to hold her daughter's hand when they were in public. That way, if Gypsy Rose ever started to say something that Dee Dee didn't want her to say, she would squeeze Gypsy Rose's hand really hard so she knew, stop, don't keep saying that. When they were alone, on, it was said that Dee Dee would often hit her daughter with open hands or with a coat hanger to keep her in line. Now, they visited a doctor named Bernardo Flasterstein. He was a pediatric neurologist in Springfield, Missouri. And he became very suspicious of the muscular dystrophy diagnosis. He ordered MRIs and blood tests, which found nothing. And he said, quote, "I don't see any reason why she doesn't walk," because she was in a wheelchair. He had seen her stand up and support her own weight. So he contacted the doctors in New Orleans and found out that the original muscular dystrophy test had come out negative, which showed that she had been lying about the diagnosis as well as lying about the fact that the records from New Orleans were all destroyed. And he suspected that Dee Dee had Munchausen by proxy syndrome. Dee Dee stopped taking Gypsy Rose to see that doctor, and he didn't follow up. He did not contact social services. He said that other doctors had told him to treat them with, quote, golden gloves, end quote, and he didn't think that the authorities would believe him anyway. In 2009, an anonymous caller called the police to report Dee Dee for using different names and birth dates for herself and Gypsy Rose, and suggested that Gypsy Rose was not sick, as her mother said. So the officers came and did a wellness check, and Dee Dee explained that she used misinformation as a way to hide from her abusive ex-husband. When the officers saw Gypsy Rose herself sitting there in her wheelchair with her shaved head and her missing teeth, and she was on, numerous drugs when they spoke to her, they believed that she was genuinely mentally disabled, and the file was closed. Now, Gypsy Rose loved attending science fiction and fantasy conventions. She went to an event in 2011 and she tried to escape from her mother. She had met a man online and she had gone with him to a hotel room, but Dee Dee found them somehow. She showed the man Gypsy Rose's fake birth certificate and said she's a minor, which she wasn't, and she threatened to call the police. And she took her daughter and went home. When they got home, Dee Dee smashed Gypsy Rose's computer and threatened to do the same to Gypsy Rose's fingers if she ever tried to escape again. And right after that, she put her on a leash and handcuffed her to her bed for the next 2 weeks. And she told her daughter that she had filed paperwork with the police, claiming that she was mentally incompetent, and that if Gypsy Rose would ever try to go to the police for help, they wouldn't believe her. So she put her daughter in such a bind. Gypsy Rose was led to believe that there was no one out there who could help her. She was trapped. And she might have been right, because, the police were not likely to believe what Gypsy Rose would say based on what she was sounding like, what she was looking like. So what could she do? In 2012, Gypsy Rose met a man on the internet. Even though she wasn't supposed to use the internet, she still did it after her mother would go to sleep. So she met a man named Nicholas Godejohn. He was from Wisconsin and he was around the same age as her. And they had met on a Christian singles website. He had a criminal record for indecent exposure and a history of mental illness. He also had autism spectrum disorder. Now, they met in person for the first time in March of 2015 at a movie theater. Gypsy Rose had set it up so that he would just kind of run into them, like she would be at the movies with her mother, and this guy would just happen to be there, and she would let her mother think that, it was just a coincidence, and she just met this guy there at the movies. According to Godejan, Gypsy Rose brought him into the bathroom where the two of them had sex. But she said that they didn't because he was, as she said, unable to perform. So after this interaction, they continued their contact on the internet and they began to make a plan to kill Dee Dee. Now, it was Gypsy Rose who had come up with the idea. She admits it was her idea, not Nicholas's, but he was willing to help her with this. So now let's move to the date of the crime. It was June 9th, 2015, and Nicholas Godejan came back to Springfield. That night, after Dee Dee had gone to sleep, Gypsy Rose let Nicholas into the house, and she gave him duct tape, gloves, and a knife, knowing what he was going to do with them. And she hid in the bathroom and covered her ears so that she wouldn't hear her mother screaming. And he stabbed Dee Dee 17 times in the back while she was asleep, and she died. They took $4,000 in cash that Dee Dee had been keeping in the house, which was supposedly from payments from Gypsy Rose's father, and they went to a nearby motel for a few days. And Gypsy Rose later said that she felt that they had gotten away with it at that point. And then they fled to Nicholas's house in Wisconsin. Meanwhile, friends of the Blanchards noticed that there was a very strange post on Dee Dee's Facebook page, which said, quote, "That bee is dead," end quote. It had actually been written by Gypsy Rose. They didn't know that, though. They're like, what is this about? And they were not able to get in contact with her. So they reported it to the police, who ultimately got a search warrant and entered the home and found Dee Dee dead and Gypsy missing. So at first they're thinking Gypsy is in danger. One of the neighbors told the police about Gypsy Rose's boyfriend, and the police were able to trace the IP address of the Facebook post back to Nicholas Godejan's house in Wisconsin, and the authorities showed up there and arrested the two. They were both charged with murder and felony armed criminal action. And right away, the media in Springfield, Missouri, told everyone the truth about the lives of Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose. So people now knew that Gypsy Rose had never been sick, and that she had been a victim for her entire life of child abuse at the hands of Dee Dee. So people had a lot of sympathy for Gypsy Rose. Her lawyer was able to get her a plea bargain to second-degree murder, and in July of 2016, she accepted the plea bargain and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Godejan did not receive such sympathy because he was not the victim of abuse. The prosecution in his case alleged that he had thought about this crime for over a year before he committed it. Nicholas's own lawyers pointed out the fact that he had autism spectrum disorder that he had simply done this crime because he was in love with Gypsy Rose and she asked him to do it. Now, a psychologist named Dr. Kent Franks testified in Nicholas Godejohn's defense. Franks said that he interviewed Godejohn in December 2015 and then again in July 2016 for a total of 11 hours. And he said that Godejohn has autism spectrum disorder level 2, requiring substantial support with accompanying intellectual impairment. He said that it would have been difficult for Godejohn to deliberate, and deliberation is necessary for committing first-degree murder. But the prosecution had a different psychologist named Robert Denny, and he also diagnosed Godejohn, and he gave him a less severe diagnosis. He gave him autism spectrum disorder level 1, and said that he had scored pretty well in a judgment test. So jurors had the option of finding him guilty of 3 different charges or finding him not guilty. So it could have been involuntary manslaughter, second degree, or first degree murder. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and they returned with the verdict of guilty of first degree murder and armed criminal action. He was sentenced to life in prison plus 25 years to be served concurrently with no chance of parole. Now, after Dee Dee was murdered, her family did not mourn her death. Nobody was willing to pay for her funeral, and her father and stepmother flushed her ashes down the toilet. Gypsy Rose's father, Rod Blanchard, stated, quote, "I think Dee Dee's problem was she started a web of lies and there was no escaping after. It was like a tornado got started." And he stated he was very happy the first time he saw his daughter actually walking in a video. On June 27th, 2022, while in prison, Gypsy Rose married a man that she had met through writing, like he was a pen pal, and his name was Ryan Scott Anderson. On September 29th, 2023, Gypsy Rose was granted parole. She was released on December 28th, 2023, after serving 85% or 8 years of her 10-year sentence. On December 5th of the same year, Nicholas Godejohn filed a new appeal. He said that, quote, "Counsel failed to act as a reasonably competent attorney under the same or similar circumstances by failing to fully investigate and present evidence from a qualified neuropsychologist specializing in autism spectrum disorder to support the diminished capacity defense," end quote. Okay, so let's move on to the shocking revelations from the documentary. When Gypsy Rose was 9 years old, she was living with her grandfather and his wife. And during that time, she alleges that he essayed her. She said, quote, "My grandpa would take me out of my wheelchair and bring me into a closet or the shack that was behind their house, where he would do woodworking and he would perform sexual acts on me. He would make me touch him. He would touch me. At 9, I don't think that I knew it was wrong. But then my grandfather told me not to tell anyone. He's like, 'You don't want Papa to go to jail, do you?' I didn't want him to get in trouble, so I just kept quiet," end quote. Gypsy Rose stated that she did try to tell her mother about this about a year after it happened, but that, she started to cry and blame herself, so I just clammed up and nobody ever knew, end quote. So Lifetime had reached out to her grandfather. His name is Claude Petra Sr., and they asked him about her allegations, and he said, quote, "No, I never. That's the first I heard of it. She would try to touch me. I would say, no, don't do that. She's the one that was trying to touch me. She started that when she was about 4 years old," end quote. Okay, so second revelation. After Gypsy Rose's grandmother died, if you recall, I spoke about the grandmother earlier. That was Dee Dee's mother, the one that she might have starved to death. So after she died, a year later, the grandfather married a new woman named Laura May, and that made Dee Dee very upset. Gypsy Rose's cousin, Bobby, recalled one day when Gypsy Rose and her grandfather were hanging out, and he said, quote, "Gypsy sees the Roundup, that's weed killer, in the corner, and she tells my grandfather, 'Oh, that's the vitamins that Mom gives to Grandma Laura May,' end quote. And Gypsy said of this, quote, "I know that my mother had this hatred toward Laura, so that is something that would be in her character to do," end quote. Okay. Next revelation. So after Gypsy Rose had had extensive surgery when she was 16, she got a prescription for pain medication, and when she ran out, she was, as she called it, craving it. She didn't know it was an addiction. She just knew she craved it. So she said, quote, "My mother had a prescription for Vicodin, and so when she wasn't looking, I would just go and take 1 or 2 from her bottle. I didn't know what addiction really was. I just knew that it was a craving. It's all I could think about. I wanted another one," end quote. She said that as her tolerance went up, she began taking 3 or 4 at a time, and that continued when she planned the murder and even while she was in prison. She said, quote, "In the first couple years of my incarceration, I coped using drugs. I think I first started to learn that drugs were available in prison when I started seeing other women get high. I tried Suboxone and it gave me the same high as taking pain pills. Instantly, I was brought back to the addiction that I had to pain pills back when I was living with my mother. At this time, Gypsy Rose is sober." Okay, so the next revelation. This one goes back to what I had been talking about earlier about Gypsy Rose trying to escape, and her mother caught her in a hotel room with a guy. Okay, so this is more detail about that. So it was the Vision Con convention, and she had met this guy named Dan. She had met him online, and she attempted to run away from home to be with him. However, Dee Dee caught her and brought her back, as I explained before, and chained her to her bed for 2 weeks as punishment. Gypsy Rose said that during this time she was not able to use the bathroom by herself and was often deprived of food, and after the 2 weeks ended, her mother put, quote, "a voodoo hex on her," and she still believes in this hex, like to this day, supposedly. So she went on to say, quote, "She printed out a picture of Dan, and she printed out a picture of me, and she went to the store and got a mason jar and a cow tongue. She put the cow tongue in the mason jar with the 2 pictures and a little bit of my menstrual blood. She buried it in the backyard and said, 'You will never find love, you will never be happy.' So I think that it's true. I just think it's true because every time I close to someone, they leave me, end quote. Right after Gypsy Rose was unchained from the bed, so after those 2 weeks ended, her mother had bought a gun. And Gypsy Rose said, quote, "That scared the ever-living F out of me. I was afraid that she would kill me," end quote. So she decided to run away again. She packed a bag and she hid it under the couch, but her mother found it. Gypsy Rose said, quote, "She was like, 'You were going to run away again, weren't you?' End quote. Gypsy Rose said that her heart started pounding at that point, and she was thinking about how bad this was going to become. And then she saw the gun sitting on the table, and she said, quote, "She normally kept the gun in her safe in her bedroom, but she had used it to practice shooting earlier that week, and that's when I grabbed the gun and I threatened her with it. And before I knew it, I pulled the trigger as many times as I could," end quote. Gypsy Rose shot her mother 10 times, but it turned out to be a BB gun. She didn't know it was a BB gun. She thought it was a real gun. So she said, quote, "When I shot my mother, I just remember thinking, oh my God, did I just do that? What did I just do?" A couple of them hit her. A couple of them hit the wall, but the wounds were superficial. They barely grazed her. That's when I realized it was a BB gun. It made me feel relieved because I did not intend to kill her. But the point is, I was shocked that I even pulled the trigger at all, end quote. Okay, next revelation. Gypsy Rose talked about how desperate she became over time and how she eventually asked Nick Godeshan to murder her mother. And she said that he had told her that he had an alternate personality, that he was a 500-year-old vampire named Victor who could carry out the task of murdering her mother for her. And she said that Nicholas became more and more twisted as the days passed. He asked her if he could RAPE her mother's dead body after he committed the crime. Gypsy Rose stated the following, quote, "Because I didn't let him RAPE my mother, I had to agree to let him RAPE me," end quote. She says that she had yelled out "stop" while he was doing it, and she had even called out for help from her dead mother. But he has never been charged for that. The next revelation is that after the two were arrested, they didn't see each other again until Gypsy Rose testified against him at his trial in 2018. She said, quote, "It was my opportunity to take the stand and take accountability, and I owned up to my part," end quote. She said that he sent her a letter from prison in 2019. Quote, "Basically, he was explaining to me that he is still in love with me, that he doesn't regret what he did, and so I began writing a letter back to him. I said, we're both paying the consequences of our choices. And then I moved on to say, I don't want a relationship with you and I'm happy," end quote. The final revelation from the documentary that I'm going to talk about is that when she got engaged to Ryan Anderson, her family was skeptical about her getting married to him. She had been engaged once before, but that man had broken up with her because he couldn't deal with all the media attention that was coming to him because of it. Gypsy Rose's stepmother, Christy, said the following, quote, "Ryan's demeanor was very pleasant, real sweet, good manners, and it makes me happy that she has somebody she can turn to. But I said, Gypsy, I'll support what you want to do, but please don't get married. Learn his habits, learn everything there is. just like he would need to learn with you. Walk out as a single woman or dating Ryan. Don't walk out married. Gypsy's father, Rod, gave the couple his blessing. He said, quote, "I like Ryan. He seems pretty genuine. So if you really love each other, it's going to work out and y'all gonna make it. You have to be in love with him. And you know I wasn't in love with your mom. Wish I would have, but you can't force that. And it's not always going to be easy. Just be strong for him when he's weak, and he'll be strong for you," end quote. So they did go ahead and get married in a simple prison ceremony. But 3 months later, they had a huge argument. And it was about one of her ex-boyfriends. They almost broke up, but Anderson went to visit her in prison and they worked it out. And Gypsy said the following, quote, "I said, I need help, I need therapy, and I think that you do too. So he got a therapist and he has gotten me a therapist, and that has been the last argument we have had. And that is the case. What are your thoughts?" I will share some of mine. So I have a few major questions to discuss. Let's start with the question of, did Dee Dee deserve to be murdered? Well, clearly she had her own mental illness and her own personality disorders, but is that an excuse for the way she treated Gypsy Rose? Of course not. No, absolutely not. She knew right from wrong. She knew she was harming her daughter. She relished the attention that it brought her, but did she deserve to be murdered for this? I've thought about that question quite a bit, and in truth, I can't even formulate an answer, so I'm gonna leave it unanswered. Alright, next, should Gypsy Rose have gone to prison for what she did, or was it self-defense? Well, it wasn't like your typical self-defense where you say you are in imminent danger. You know, typically you have to be able to prove that at that moment you feared for your life, and if you did not kill the person, you were gonna die. So this wasn't like that at all, you know. Especially since Dee Dee was asleep in her bed, right? But, you know, hearing the whole story, we know that Gypsy Rose felt that she had no way out of this situation, you know, and that her life and her health was at risk every single day. So it's like a special circumstance, you know. Plus, her mental health was completely compromised from having lived this way. You know, she wasn't thinking with a healthy mind at that point. Can she be held accountable? I personally do not feel that she should have gone to prison at all. And I'm not sure what kind of charge, if any, she should have received, just based on the special circumstances here. I believe she definitely needed some kind of residential treatment, you know, to get her back to physical and mental health. But in truth, she said that her stay in prison was very freeing. It was much more free than the lifestyle she had with her mother. And she said that she learned a lot while she was in there, and she grew a lot. So my final question is, should Nicholas Godejohn serve out a life sentence with no chance of parole? Is it fair that Gypsy Rose is now out of prison and he is still there and will be there forever, even though he committed the crime that she asked for? Is that right? Well, the situation for him is a lot different than it was for Gypsy Rose, you know. She was the victim of abuse by Dee Dee for her entire life. She felt trapped there. Nicholas was not trapped by Dee Dee. He was not abused by Dee Dee. Although he says he loved Gypsy Rose and that's why he did this. But he's not this nice, loving, great guy. Not at all. I mean, he wanted to essay Dee Dee's dead body, and then reportedly he did essay Gypsy Rose right after the murder. So he sounds like he might be a pretty dangerous guy. But I definitely feel that he deserves a new evaluation by an expert to see if he really should have been charged with first-degree murder, or if it should have been something else due to his low IQ. So I definitely say get him a new evaluation and